me start first by asking how many of you have been to England? Oh, a few. So if you will just imagine, if you will, it's let's say early March, and you're standing in a field in the East Anglia portion of England. And as you breathe in, you expect the smell of flowers to waft into the air, but no, you hear the roar of massive reciprocating motors, and the smell of aviation fuel permeates into your nostrils. Because what it is 6 March 1944, and you're standing in the East Anglia portion of England, right next to Thorpe Abbotts, which is a very active bombing base. Now, my good friend, Bob Shones, has just been alerted for what will be his 16th mission, flying the B-17 in World War II. Little does Bob know that today is going to be his most harrowing mission. Bob's target for today is Berlin. Now, the U.S. Army Air Forces have only flown over Berlin once in this conflict, and this will be the second day that they hit their targets. Bob recalls as he climbs out over England and heads for continental Europe, the skies were so clear that day that he could see Germany from England. Now, today was a massive strike against the German target. They had 730 bombers and 800 fighters escorting across the channel. Now, that formation, if you can't picture that, is over 60 miles long. And after the war, Bob talked to some of the Germans that were on the ground, and they said that from the time the first airplane flew over until the last was about 90 minutes. As soon as they went feet dry or crossed onto the continent of Europe, the first wave of German fighters hit the formation. Now, as Bob recalls it, several of his aircraft in his formation were lost in that first engagement. Bob was fortunate enough to shoot down 2 Me-109 fighters, but in that first melee, they lost 50 bombers, and they pressed on towards Berlin. Now, when they got over Berlin, they had lost 200 bombers when they approached their target. 539 planes floated over that city that day. And if you look at this picture, you'll notice those big black splotches in the background. Those aren't clouds. Those are artillery shells that the Germans are throwing into the air, hoping to hit our bombers. So Bob, as he approaches the city, he's with the formation. The formation turns left after they drop their bombs right into a flak field. And Bob knows turning left is not a good thing, so Bob turns right to escape the artillery. And he realizes he's alone. One of the quips during the day was the quickest way to die over Germany was to be in a bomber alone over Germany. And Bob and his crew of 9 were in a bomber alone over Germany. They were able to join up with another formation and head back to England. And as Bob flew over Thorpe Abbotts, he looked down and he noticed there were no aircraft on the field. So he landed his battle-damaged B-17, taxied into his parking spot, looked across the tarmac, and he saw a squadron commander sitting in his car. Squadron commander motioned for Bob to come over. As Bob walked over, he looked and he couldn't help but notice water in the squadron commander's eyes. All Bob could muster at that point was simply, "What?" The commander looked at him and said, "You're the only one. You're the only one to come back." So as Bob walked over to the Quonset hut for his intelligence debrief, such was the tradition in that day that there was a table for each one of the crews. 15 crews were not coming back that day. 10 people on each one of those crews. So as Bob talks about walking into the Quonset hut for the intelligence debrief, he looked. The intelligence officers used to put a glass of whiskey by each member's table, each chair. All Bob remembers walking into the Quonset hut that day was the cool air and the smell of alcohol rising from 150 shot glasses that would not be consumed. Bob and the crew of Argyle Sal was the only plane to make it back that day from the 351st. The 351st was a squadron in a group called the 100th Bombardment Group. After today, the 100th Bombardment Group became known as the Bloody 100th for all of the losses that they took. Why Does this matter? You see, Bob Shones is my friend. Bob Shones is a brother in arms. Bob is 95, and Bob is a hero. Also of note, Bob flew with the Bloody 100th, or the 100th Bomber Group, in 1944. I was honored to command the Bloody 100th, or the 100th Operations Group, in 2010 to 2012. So, in a way, Bob and I are tied. Bob and I are brothers in arms. So, what I've noticed in meeting people like Bob, and other people that I'll call heroes, or I would say in reading about heroes, studying about heroes, watching Marvel movies or DC movies, that a lot of these folks have things in common. And I've started to call that the hero's mindset. What I've noticed is, well, let's call it, it's 4 H's, more or less, and I'll get to the more or less. But what I've noticed in these folks is they're humble, they're hungry, they're heroes, and we'll get to that, of the heart. Now, by no means am I saying that I'm a hero, but I have been known to have, well, I do have a mean collection of heroes t-shirts. I usually wear to the gym in one. But I'm not a hero. But let's break that down a little bit. Humble, hungry, heroes of the heart. Humble. When I first met Bob, and I heard his story, it's a great book, I read the book about his mission, and I asked him, what was that like, Bob? I mean, I don't understand flying in the war over Europe with the flak. And when he talked about the enemy fighters hitting the bombers and watching friends that he knew, loved ones that weren't coming back, what was that like? Bob looked at me and he goes, I was just doing my job, just like you. That's Bob. But what I've noticed this thing about heroes is there's a humility combined with a fierce resolve. Because what the hero knows is humility enhances their leadership or their heroic effectiveness. You see, as a hero, humility is multidimensional. Humility enables the hero to increase self-understanding, to increase their awareness, to increase their openness, to increase their perspective-taking. The next thing I notice about heroes, they're hungry. I don't mean hungry like this guy. They're not hungry for your next meal, not hungry for your next promotion, not hungry for your next, I don't know, pay raise, your corner office, your cool car. No, what heroes are hungry for is knowledge. Because heroes know that knowledge makes them, well, I should say heroes are learners. They read, they listen, they engage, they study, they act, they learn, and in some cases they relearn, but they're hungry for knowledge. Because it's about being humble and staying hungry. Now next, when I talked about 4 H's, more or less, that's because when we look at the definition of heroes, what we find is that in the dictionary, a hero is defined as somebody who's known for their courage, for their high achievement, and their moral character. So courage. Obviously, we look at a guy like Bob, and we can see that Bob had a lot of courage. Just flying that mission was an amazing amount of courage. However, what does it mean for us every day? I would say courage is the idea of moving intention to action. Because it takes courage to do things like articulate a vision for the future. It takes courage to build relationships with challenging people. It takes courage to challenge people to grow and to change, to mend broken relationships, to confront difficult problems, to make hard or unpopular decisions. Next, outstanding achievement. Obviously, we can look at a guy like Bob and say, that's outstanding achievement. I mean, flying a mission like that, being the only one to come back, amazing. But what I've noticed is this idea of outstanding achievement to the hero is a little different because it's engaged in voluntarily. It's conducted in service, usually in service to a huge group, but it could be service to another person. It could be service to a country, a nation, to God. Service. Next, it involves risk. Risk to your personal well-being, risk to your status, risk to your reputation, and finally, it's initiated without expectation of material gain. I know Bob didn't ask, how much do I get for flying this mission? And next is this concept of strong moral character. And I want to pause there for a minute and kind of give you a story. You all remember 9/11. Some of you were really young. For me, on 9/11, I remember I just got back from a morning run. Now, we were living in California, so we were 3 hours behind New York and DC. Found out what happened. I got in my truck. I drove to the base, went storming into my squadron commander's office and said, "Put me in, coach. No idea where we're going, no idea what we're doing, but you got to count me in." I got my wish. I ended up being the senior ranking officer for 5 KC-10s that ended up flying out of Doha International. Before I go further, what is a KC-10? The KC-10 is a massive airplane. It's an air refueling tanker or a flying gas station. I know to some people, it's like, that does not sound romantic at all. But I would tell you, without gas, people can't do a lot of stuff. And the KC-10 is huge. It weighs 593,000 pounds fully loaded. That's 356,000 pounds of gas, which you go, I don't know how much gas weighs. All right, 60,000 gallons. To put it in terms you might understand, if I pulled that plane up to the gas station, it would cost about $175,000 to fill it up. The good news is, if you pull your car up behind me and I could actually pass that fuel to you, I could fill your car up in 2 seconds. 1, 2, you're good to go. So it's a pretty amazing piece of equipment. When we took off, we had what we called hard crews. So we flew with the same people every day. So my crew was a guy named Tony Torres, who I usually refer to as Long Tony, Wiederhausen, who nobody can pronounce his name, so we call him House, and US Bass. And we flew a bunch of missions together. In fact, I would tell you, we were in country 20 September 2001, and we flew several reconnaissance missions. We flew the first combat sortie. We were on the very first order that flew into Afghanistan, or up to the border of Afghanistan, on 6 October, and then we entered into this cycle where it was kind of a sleep, fly, sleep, fly, sleep, fly, sleep, until we got alerted one morning for this mission. Now this mission, the idea was basically fly down the Gulf, hang a left into Pakistan, hang a left into Afghanistan, hang out for a while. At this time, what was going on, no Air Force fighters could get into Afghanistan. If you remember back then, we had no troops on the ground. Navy fighters were all that we could get in there, and US bombers. So our mission for the day was to fly a 2-ship of KC-10s. Me and my friend Mark Sullivan would take our planes, fly into Afghanistan, which was different about today. It was a daylight sortie, and we were actually in Afghanistan. Our fighter friends were tasked to suppress, which is a nice way of saying destroy, anti-aircraft artillery and surface-to-air missiles. Hard to remember back then, but the Taliban actually had things that they were shooting at us. So we got out to our airplane that day, our tail number 70119, and she's a beauty. We get in there, we find out, we check the forms, we got a brand new number 3 engine. Of course, who doesn't want a brand new motor? That's awesome. We go to start engines, and we have a massive hydraulic leak. So I called Sully, told Sully, you're gonna have to go ahead without us, we'll rejoin you in Afghanistan. Sully takes off, we get fixed about 30 minutes later, and we start flying to meet Sully. Now, the KC-10 is a very fast airplane. It's big, but it's fast. It flies at about 0.84 Mach, which is just below the speed of sound, and we may have been flying a little faster to hook up with Sully. So Sully, meanwhile, is over Afghanistan, and he has all these guys flying around him. Remember, he has my receivers and his receivers, fighters. Now, the problem was the KC-10 can pass gas, wait for it, thank you, can pass gas through 3 different places. There's 2 wing pods and there's a center drogue. Center drogue is broke, 1 wing pod is down, and the other one is dying. So I call Sully, I say, don't worry, I'm coming, my cape's blowing in the wind, and we're screaming into Afghanistan. I make the left turn I told you about into Afghanistan, about 0.84 Mach, give or take, and all of a sudden on my dashboard, everything starts lighting up, and I get all kinds of warnings in my headset saying that something is really wrong. I look down at the number 3 motor, and it's trying to go in reverse. Now, I know I don't have a lot of pilots in the room probably, but if you're doing almost the speed of sound in a plane that weighs 590,000 pounds and one motor's trying to go in reverse, you see what I'm getting at. We're probably going to depart controlled flight. Now, the good thing is the Air Force is really good about safety mechanisms. So what's happening is that thrust reverser is trying to open and there's a piece of metal holding it shut. The question is, how long will that metal hold? So Sully declares an emergency. He can't pass any more fuel. I declare an emergency. Obviously, I want to go home quick. And every single one of the fighters declares an emergency because they don't have enough gas to get to a landing field. So what do? Now we have airborne radar that tracks all of us, and they're getting a little upset because everything's going bad. And I keyed the mic and I said, we'll take the fighters. And they said, confirm your emergency aircraft. I said, confirmed, we are emergency aircraft, we will take the fighters. They immediately told us the fighters cannot climb to you, they're too low on gas. Descend, which meant descend into the threat rings, and get the fighters. Nobody thought for a second about not doing that. We descended in broad daylight over Kandahar to get our Marine brothers out. When the Marines came up to get gas, of course, House was in the back feeding gas to them, and House gave them the briefing, if this plane even starts to do anything crazy, you need to get away as quick as possible. Again, we don't know how long that piece of metal is going to hold. The good news is, it held. So we were able to pull the Marines out. Now, when they first came up to get gas, they were so low on fuel, they could only sip a little bit of gas. If you imagine maybe 6 hummingbirds on a flower, that's what that was like. They had to come in and get a little gas, back out, get a little more gas, back out, get a little more gas, so they could all stay airborne together. So what we did was we dragged them back out towards their ship, we dropped them off, and now we had to figure out how to get home. So we started talking about where do we land, and all the fields had too many planes, so we couldn't go there. We had to fly back to Al-Udeid, which is our recovery base. We shut the motor down. We can talk later about why we didn't shut it down earlier. Went back to Al-Udeid, and we landed with the motor out. My point, strong moral character. Everybody on the crew that day, we had talked about what would we do if something like this happened. We all knew what we'd do. We didn't have to ask any questions. Integrity, fortitude, honesty, loyalty. Now I would tell you right now, this very minute, there's tankers over Afghanistan, tankers over Iraq, tankers over Syria. They all do the same thing. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, you know these things. It's all about strong moral character. What's interesting about the hero doesn't think of themselves before acting. The hero will only think of the consequences of not acting at all. Because a hero acts on instinct. There's no thought behind a heroic deed. But why do we do it? Because we love these guys. Now, shortly after, I volunteered to extend for another tour in the desert. Except this time I would fly from the Middle East down to an island in the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia. So I flew down there. My squadron commander was actually the commander of Diego, and I was going to be the number 2 or the second in command. When I got off the airplane, my commander met me, went up to the squadron, and he said, I have to show you something. And pinned to a bulletin board was a letter from the Marine Corps squadron commander, thanking my squadron commander for what we did. But if you think about it, what was he really thanking our commander for? Thanking him for being a humble, hungry hero of the heart. Because we saw that in him, and our crew did that, and all the crews today would still do that. It's all about this brothers in arms kind of thing, right? That we'd do anything for those guys. Those Marines, I've never met them, not to this day. I'd do it again. But I would ask you this, what does it mean for you all at Samford? Do you love the people you get to hang out with? The people here at Students? What about the alumni? There's a special bond between you and your alumni, and I guarantee the alumni are doing stuff for you today that you don't even know about. And they're doing it because they love you guys. And they haven't even met you. It's this idea of family. You know, I hope that I mirror to my boys this humble, hungry hero of the heart, because I want them to mirror it to my grandkids. Right? So imagine this. What if we all could start this idea of a heroic mindset, a hero's mindset movement? If we all were sort of humble in our actions, we're all hungry for knowledge to better ourselves, to better our community, to be heroes, to be known for our courage, for our outstanding achievement, and for our moral character. And we did it all from our heart because we loved people around us. Do you think we could change Samford? Could we change Birmingham? Could we change Alabama? Change the world? I think we could. Thank you.